Afternoon, folks. Old Buster's coming to you again. Well, I just want you to know we had a little marathon of reading stories here. Miss Lulu's going to take off for a few days on vacation, and so we got a few stories up ahead for you, all ready to go on a Sunday. And she hadn't been feeling too well, so hope she'll get to feeling better and relaxed a little bit there on the vacation. Well, appreciate all of y'all coming in, listening to the stories. We had some mighty fine folks had some nice things to say about us. We appreciate that. And for listening and coming in. Well, the name of this story today is Doin Thangs. Now, this story is when the boys were a little bit older. Now, they're not completely growed yet, but they're getting close to getting out of school. Name of it's Doin Thangs. Buster, what in the dickens are you going to do with that thing? Asked Grandpa Gus. Well, Jesse, Walter, and Thar was just a grinning hunkered down over there under a sweet gum tree whilst Buster was a-pulling that two-seater champ with his little case tractor he always dished with. Buster and the boys had done gone over to the Shannon place where old Reggie was laid up drunker than a cooter brown as himself. Well, Reggie done had one snort too many over to Memphis at the Thunderbird Lounge and reckoned he would buzz the town in the airplane. Well, when he got back towards Talltech and landed in the grass strip at their place, the police was a-waiting for him. Well, as a high sheriff, I reckon. That was the end of his flying days for sure. And that weekend, Buster made a deal for the plane with a quart of old McBrayer and $500. Reggie wasn't wanting to drink awful bad, and his pa and brother done took all the driving stock and keys away from him, and he didn't have no way to get none. When Buster and the boys come by, old Reggie was a-seeing snakes and all sorts of critters that was trying to crawl up on him. He made a deal right then and there and signed the papers for that there airplane for Buster. Walter drove Buster over to his and Grandpa Gus's place and got his in a little case and pulled it on back to the barn. The Shannon place was on the north end of the old county road and only about 2 miles from the barn as a crow flies. Buster pulled the plane across the road and on up the backside of the Tolliver place and on to Central Road and then on to their place by the back way. The ground was sandy and smooth and it weren't no trouble at all. Well, Grandpa Gus had just come in from the field next to old man Mason's place to check in on the relift and see them a-coming. Buster told his and Grandpa Gus he was going to fly that plane come hell to high water, just like he done in World War I at Kelly Field there at San Antonio, Texas. That was before they put Grandpa Gus in the infantry and he was sent to France. Now, Howard was also bound and determined to fly that plane too, and Jesse and Walter had the bright idea to be wing walkers. A wing walker's a feller that stood out there on the wing of the plane and just hanging on for dear life. They done seed that at the air show at the old air base over in Stuttgart. That was where Buster's mama worked during the war. That's World War II. Well, Howard and Buster got her all unhitched and checked out real good and fueled her up. Well, Buster done asked Howard if he knowed where to start, and he said to take a look under the seat and see if there was an instruction book with the plane. Well, sure enough, there was, but they couldn't make heads or tails of it. Greek to them. So they just decided to take her out for a little test run. The road by the bayou on the south side was pretty darn smooth that time of the year and was sandy loam and well packed. Well, Buster hollered to them to all stand back, cranked her up with Howard sitting right there beside him. Both of them tried out all the levers and pedals before they give her the gas and was a-thinking they was getting the hang of it. They had all seen Reggie fly her and remembered when some of them what he was a-doing. Buster eased up the throttle on the plane and the plane began to moving. She got up on 2 wheels and the tail wheel barely off of the ground when Buster come to a little bend in the road. Well, Buster went to stomping the brakes and Howard pulled back the throttle. They just eased over the side but didn't tear up nothing, but was going to have to pull the plane out back to level ground with the little case tractor. Walter and Jesse was just howling and laughing when they see Buster and Howard walking back to the case. Well, Grandpa Gus just shook his and Hayed and told them not to kill themselves. And they sure enough needed to practice right smart before they went to flying, that's for sure. Well, they all chipped in and got the champ back to level ground, and checked her on out. She weren't hurt none, and the boys figured they would ease on over to Tom Kiley's at the Keogh Airport. He was a local crop duster and ought to be able to tell them how to fly the champ. Now Andy, a school friend of the boys, took to flying for a living, and they went to school with him, so they figured if he can do it, so could they. Last time they cut hogs over at the Pryor place, Andy swore he wouldn't be no farmer, and sure enough he quit a farming with his and Pa. Tom was sitting drinking a Coke with peanuts and eating some cheese and peanut butter crackers and reading the sports page when they call come in. Well, Tom asked the boys what was up and if they wanted something to drink. Well, they all said sure enough and told him about buying Reggie's champ. Tom said it was the easiest plane there was to fly, pretty near flew itself. Well, Tom took them out to one of the Pawnees he flew and gave them the gist of what they had to do. He said if they would help him move some seed into the hangar, he would take them up and show them a thing or two about a fly. Walter and Jesse told Buster and Howard to go on up first. Now Walter, being the trickster that he was, knowed what Tom was going to do. First thing right off the bat when he got out of sight of the boys was to show Buster what all was to be done flying and all the controls and what they was. Well, after Buster said he about got the hang of it, Tom let him fly the plane for a spell. Well, after Tom got the controls back, he went into some sure enough tricks. He rolled and spiraled and flew on his and back and done all manner of tricks. He had Buster green as a gourd and about to be a two-per-penny commode-hugging yellow dog Democrat called Ralph. Well, Tom was just a-grinning and let Buster settle down before they went on back. Well, Buster sure was proud to have his 2 feet on the ground, I tell you. Tom then asked Howard if he wanted to go up. Howard, he sure enough did. Boy, they was gone for quite a spell when the boys seen them coming in for the landing. Well, Howard jumped out of that plane like a Mexican jumping bean and just a-grinning and a-jabbering how he was going to be a jet pilot. Well, Tom said he tried as hard as he could to get Howard woozy and sick. Well, Howard stuck like glue and hollered for him to do more tricks. Tom said he done all he knowed and still couldn't get Howard ditherated none. Thingest thing he'd ever seen. He reckoned Howard might make one heck of a pilot. Buster said he'd fly the dang thing, but he wasn't in for none of them tricks. And Howard said he was having so much fun he could do it all day long. Walter and Jesse told him he done found his and caught it. Well, after that, Howard was a-flying gyrocopters and them parachutes with motors on them and hang gliding and anything else he could get in the air. Buster just stuck to the plain old flying, but I'm a-getting ahead of myself in this here story. The boys went on back to the house, and Tom said to come back when he wasn't busy and he would teach them some more about flying. Buster and Howard told him they appreciated the lessons and would come back when he had the time, and in the meantime would keep practicing out at the farm. Well, it wasn't long before Buster and Howard got the champ to lift off the ground and flew her for a bit and then set her back down. They'd done that a whole bunch of times till they could take off and land pretty good. Both of them was about as good as the other until one day they'd decided to fly over to Tom's airport. Walter and Jesse said they'd drive on over in Buster's Ford and meet them there. Well, Buster done the honors and him and Howard took off and got over to the airport and landed. First time they tried the landing, they overshot the runway and ended up in the cotton field next to the airport. Again, they didn't hurt nothing, but had to get her pulled back on the grass strip. Tom come out and told the boys they needed more practicing, but they was doing real good. Tom said to come back the next day and just leave the plane there and he'd check it out himself and make sure it was okay to fly. Tomorrow morning, he said, and before the dew burns off, and we'll do some flying. After lessons with Tom and practicing out at the farm, Howard and Buster got right good at flying the champ. They both flew with Walter and Jesse, and all the boys got to know the little champ inside and out. One Saturday, Walter and Jesse made up to try to wing walking. Now, Jesse done read up on wing walking and visited with them at the air show fellers over at the airport at Stuttgart and got right familiar with what to do and how to rig up to be a wing walker. Walter just wasn't afeard of no heights, but he sure enough was of close places. Heck, if he got in a tight place, he was going to come out of it and ain't nothing nobody better be in his way neither. The boy didn't care one whit if he'd blister or bleed, but he was a-comin' out of there, that's for sure. Well, anyhow, Walter and Jesse done rigged up the wing walking gear and had Buster and hired to take 'em up just over the treetops to get the hang of doing it. Of course, Buster and hired took it real easy and kept the Champ steady and level. The Champ wasn't no fast plane, and it was easy to control, and the boys practiced all day. Well, everybody was in town on Saturday. Sunday was going to be a town picnic in the park, and the boys decided to put on a little show themselves. Walter and Jesse done got them some goggles and leather helmets and leather gloves and aviator boots to match their leather jackets. Well, Jesse and Walter wasn't very big back then and didn't weigh much. The Champ would carry all three of them, and hired was lighter than Buster by about 60 pounds, I guess. The town was only 6 miles from the farm and closer than that as the crow flies, so they'd have plenty of fuel with only half a tank and would cut down on weight too. Well, all the boys had made up the plan and had it all figured out by the time the picnic got into full swing. Now on to 1 o'clock, Buster took off towards town at the picnic in the park with Jesse and Walter tied up in the rigs on each wing. Well, everything went off without a hitch, and when Buster buzzed the picnic and everybody went to hooping and hollering and a-pointing at the boys. About the time they got right over the doings, Jesse unfurled a banner that read, "Little Dove's Wonder Cream," and Walter let one fly that said, "Mother Nature's lit gift of youth." The boys still made right smart of royalty money on them products and figured they would get a little free advertising whilst they was a-flying. Well, Buster flew the boys on back to the farm, and Hired took over and flew them back for another round. Well, after Hired brought Walter and Jesse back, he said he was going to go up for a bit by his himself. The boy said okay, and Buster was listening to Walter and Jesse telling how much fun they was having a wing walking. Now, they said they could see folks they knowed and was waving, and even some of the gals they was trying to court was yelling up at them to come on down for cake and ice cream. All around about 30-40 minutes later, Hired come back. They put up the plane and headed into town to the picnic. When they got there, everybody started clapping and slapping them on the back and saying how wonderful the show was, and how in the world did they know how to fly and wing walk. But the dangest thing, they said, was how much they liked the tricks Hired done in the Champ. Why, that rascal done learnt how to do some of them tricks that Tom done. Fact is, Tom done taught him several of them, and just what the Champ could do. Hired said the next time they went to flying, he would show them tricks, and Buster said he would watch Hired from the ground. None of that for him. They wasn't laughing about that for sure. Buster didn't want to get green round the gills again, and he knowed Hired would do it to him just for meanness. You see, he was as bad as Walter when it come to tricking and funning. The boys all met up at Leake's drugstore Wednesday evening after church for a malt and moon pie, and Mr. Leake, some of the other businessmen in town, asked the boys to sit and talk a spell with them. They said they wanted to hire them for advertising their stores over the county fair coming up and some special events on the 4th of July. Heck, fire, now they was going to make some good money for something they all love doing. About that time, some of the gals at the schoolhouse come over and invited them to a party on Saturday night, and the prom queen took up with Jesse and told him she wanted him to be her date and escort her to her coming out dance in Little Rock. Boy, Jesse's pheromones was a-popping out all over them gals, cause before he got out of the drugstore, 3 more was asking him for study dates, supper, and a hayride and a weenie roast by the lake. Now, Walter and Lou Ann and Hired had that little snow gal, Alma May, and Buster had a passel of them too after him, and they was wanting to ride in the Champ. Well, Jesse said to them gals that he wasn't going to go unless Buster come too, and since all them gals knowed each other, they said that was just fine. They went off a-giggling when all the boys' folks come into the drugstore and said they wanted to talk to them. All of them. Lord of mercy, the boys was wondering how much trouble they was in now. Well, seems like Tom Kiley done talked to all the folks and told them how good they was a-flying, and he would sign for them to get their license. What the folks said was that on Friday they was a-going with them to get their license in Little Rock, and they couldn't fly no more till they did. Well, their paws just grinned, and the boys said they sure put on a show, but Hired's ma was a bit trifled over his tricks. He was going to take some real lessons before he done that again. Well, Hired looked over at the boys and just rolled his eyes. And his folks didn't see that, or he'd been behind the woodshed. Well, Jesse's grandpa Esker and Grandma Nanny was into town for a picnic, which he didn't know, and was right excited to see Jesse out on the wing walking. Jesse had to tell him all how it was done and how he learned all about it. Walter's folks was right interested in that too, and wasn't none too keen on Walter standing on that wing, but his brothers and sisters was, I tell you. Walter had one up on old Melvin, that's for sure. Things settled down after a bit, and the boys was having a high old time with the airplane. They made might near a year's wages on that July 4th and was in high demand in their neck of the woods. Buster and Hired got their license, and Walter and Jesse performed in the air show with them the following year. You know, the funny thing was that Jesse was always scared of heights. Why in the world he wanted to be a wing walker was a mystery to the boys and Jesse's folks. Buster asked Jesse how come he done it, and Jesse told Buster it was 'cause he had to get over it somehow, and he just liked the notion of the wind in his face. It just seemed like it'd be fun. I'm a-telling you right now that might be true, but he was still skittish about them heights. He was a white knuckler, if and you know what I mean. Now Walter, on the other hand, was just as crazy as a loon, a-grinning and a-laughing and having himself a big old high time when he was a-flying wing walking. That boy was always a mess, still is to this day. The boys was into something all the time and always doing things. Buster dearly loved to go over to Jesse's for dinner, for supper. Heck, any time, 'cause Mrs. McBrayer always had something good to eat, and Jesse just didn't eat much. Buster always got Jesse's corn on the cob and all that sappy stuff too, like chicken and dumplings. Smothered steak. Oh man, Buster could eat that just till his eyeballs rolled back. Winter shakes. Well, anyhow, Buster was over there with Hired and Walter one Saturday. The wall telephone began to ring, and Jesse's pa answered it, and it spoke to Miss Swain about Jesse going on down to Montgomery, Alabama that is, for a parade and a dance with her gal, Denise, if and Jesse could escort her. Some kind of hold down they was having with their family all involved in it, and their gal Denise dearly wanted Jesse to go with her. Boy, them pheromones got all over that gal, I tell you. And of course, Jesse liked the gal real well too. Started to marry the gal later in life. She also wanted to know if the boys could fly their airplane and do that wing walking over the parade and over the town too. She didn't rightly know if it was okay for them to go that far or not. Well, Mr. McBrayer said he would ask Jesse and the boys and their folks, but if the boys wanted to do it, there wouldn't be no problem with them. They done it so many times now that it was like second nature to them. Well, she also said the town was going to pay for the show, and they had them a banner made for them to pull behind it too. Now Jesse sure enough fancied Denise, and if it hadn't been for a wing walking, he might have never sported that gal. They had been to the picture show and dated with some boys and their gals too a couple of times. Well, Denise was a pretty thing, and every boy in the school wanted to go out with her. She was right popular, you might say. Well, Jesse was kind of shy about things like that, but once you got him a-going, he was hell-bent for leather. The boys said they wanted to do the show, and their folks all agreed to let the boys go. All of them was going to go to the dance, too, and Luann and the snow gal, Alma May, was going to come down in Buster's Ford. Denise said she had her girlfriend to go with Buster, and he reckoned that would be all right, 'cause he seed her with Denise, and she was tall enough to dance with and pretty as a speckled pup. Her name was Fran Honeycutt, and her people hailed from down the cotton plant, but moved up to England last year. Her pa was the manager of the gin for the Hendersons. Well, Jesse just didn't know what all he was letting himself in for, that's for sure. When the boys got there, Denise done told Jesse he was to ride on the float down the main street. Well, all the escorts was to be on the float, and the gals was on another for some version of a dang French holiday they celebrated down there. Ain't none of the boys ever heard of such, but they decided they was there, they would might as well go along with it. Talk about funny. They done had Jesse put up on a dad-burn clown outfit outfit that had breeches way too big for Jesse. He had on these tights that them ballet dancers wore underneath, so it weren't too bad, but it was that hat that made a feller split his insides. Dangest thing you ever saw, something right out the movies. Well, Jesse didn't get to do much wing walking because of him riding on the float, but he did make a pass or two before he had to put on that get-up. When Jesse got up on the float, there were some fellas there celebrating and had some punch for him to drink. Whilst they was riding and waving to the folks, Jesse and them fellers was throwing beads and moon pies out to the crowd. Now, being as hot and all, that punch was tasty and pretty good there. And before long, Jesse was a plump snockered, boys. That's just the way it is. That punch had a kick to it, you know. It was sure enough spiked with some awful fine white lightning, and Jesse was as looped as one of Thar's tricks in the champ. Them breeches he was a-wearing that was too big for him done fell off of him, and he didn't even know it. Danged if he didn't ride the whole way down Main Street of Montgomery, Alabama with his breeches down to his knees. The boys met Jesse when he got to the end of the parade route and seed the pitcher of punch done went dry. Well, Jesse looked down and declared to the boys he was exposed. Well, he sure enough was, and they reckoned Jesse give him a show for sure riding up there on that float. They had to take Jesse and get him a nap before he could make it to the dance that evening, cause he wasn't in no shape for dancing nor escorting. Come to find out, the fellers on that float with Jesse done sneaked the liquor in the punch to loosen things up a bit before all their celebrating. When Jesse come around later that evening, he told the boys he knowed it had a little kick to it, but that punch was right tasty as hot as it was, and it was right refreshing. Well, seeing how Jesse got his nap and the festivities was in full swing, all of them hated out for a high old time with the gals. Jesse was fresh scrubbed and had on his Sunday go-to-meeting suit, and Denise was gussied up too. They made quite the pair, and Jesse was a-dancing up a storm. You know, his and Ma had made him take dancing lessons, but nobody knowed that but the boys, and they was swore to the secret. The trip down to Montgomery was just as much fun getting there as it was being in the parade and at the dance. Buster and Howard flew the champ, and Jesse and Walter drove Buster's Ford with the gals. They was flying about 382 air miles as the crow flies, but by land it was 464 miles. They stopped for fuel in Memphis, Tupelo, and again in Birmingham before they got to Montgomery. On the way back, they stopped for barbecue and ribs at Neely's and rested up a bit before starting the last leg home. In Tupelo, all of them went to see where Elvis was born, and when Billy Kane Bailey's old stomping grounds where he raised up as a youngin' too. His brother Earl still lived there, but was laid off from work at the Lazy Boy plant and had to go to work at the Walmart as a greeter to try to make ends meet. Then they was back on the road and in the air. Buster and Howard swapped out flying, and each of them took a little nap on the way. Right peaceful it was, and as close to heaven as a feller could get without a dying. Whilst they was a-flying, Buster up and asked Howard if he thought they ought to name the champ. Well, Howard said he reckoned it wouldn't hurt none, and it would get to having it painted on the plane as soon as they landed. Well, Howard asked Buster if he had thought up something for a name, and Buster said he wanted to call her Belle, the Belle of the South. Howard thought that was awful pretty and voted for it. Walter and Jesse stopped for a rest and to gas up. Howard landed, and Buster run up to him and asked him if they thought Belle was the right proper name for the champ. Well, all of them agreed, and Buster said they was going to go ahead and have it painted on the sides of the plane before the show next day. Well, all went off without a hitch, and the Belle of the South was painted red, white, and blue, just like the flag. It was done up right by a fella there in Birmingham that Denise's pa knowed, and sure enough was spectacular looking. Belle always kicked up a stir when she was in town for her show with the flying tricks of Howard and the wing walking of Walter and Jesse. Why, Jesse even took to flying upside down, inverted, standing on his and hay. They was a hit every time they flew on Belle, and their act was booked every year till they was growed and married up with young'uns of their own. Belle never was sold, and still sits in Buster's grandpa's Gus's barn covered with a tarp so's the pigeons wouldn't make a mess on her. Buster had a mechanic from Little Rock come by every month to maintenance Belle, and to this day she is ready to fly now she was then. It was quite the trip, but home was looking good too. The boys all hashed over the events and did a little speculating on what was to come next. they had a check in the mail from them computers Jesse put money in for them. IBM it was, and they decided to go over to Amarillo on Saturday. Well, only Walter could make it, and he went with his and brother Melvin and some of the Britton boys. You know, there was about 20 of them, all cousins and brothers. Henry and Manley was always in some kind of mischief with Walter, and this time wasn't no exception. There was a feller from down around Muleshoe in town at the bar where Walter and Melvin and the boys was having a cool one. Feller was right nice and was a football player, knowed to be good and going to Tech there in Lubbock. Well, Walter and the feller got to jawing, and he says to Walter that he just couldn't be took down. He was likable, Walter said, and wasn't nothing meant by what he said, a saying took to be harsh or disrespectful, but the boys just couldn't let that go by without having him to be taught a lesson. Between Walter, Melvin, and the Britton boys, they done took off that feller's paints and throwed him up on top of the flat roof of that bar. They just left out of laughing with no harm done, excepting the feller didn't have no paints on. The next day, Walter and Melvin was sitting at the table eating with their pa when he said that, what was the world coming to? There was a feller in Amarillo over there arrested of climbing on the top of the roof of a bar with no paints on. Well, Walter and Melvin never even batted an eye or let on they knowed anything about that feller with no paints on. They sure enough had a hoot over that one, though, I tell you. Mischief, just pure D mischief. Whilst Walter went to Amarillo for the weekend, Hired went to visit Ken with his and folks in Fort Smith. It was a pretty good drive for them days, but the days was right enjoyable this time of year, and his and Pa and Ma always enjoyed the drive, and his ma packed a mighty fine picnic lunch for them for the trip. The lemonade was on ice and sweetened just right with fresh peach pie for dessert. When they got to Hired's cousin's place, he told Hired there was a motorcycle show out at the fairground and asked him if he'd like to go see it. Well, Hired told him heck yeah, and off they went. There was a feller, his name was Evil the Knievel, that was going to jump over a crate of rattlers and other pies and snakes with his motorcycle. Now that Hired had to see. Well, it come time for the show, and this feller Evil Knievel took off on up the ramp to jump over the crate of snakes when his motor sputtered and he lost power. Well, Evil Knievel landed in amongst them snakes with them a slithering every which a place, and he sure was lucky he wasn't bit none. Well, Hired didn't waste no time. He grabbed up a tow sack and began to catching them snakes with his hands and putting them in the tow sack. He must have gathered up 24 of them, and all different kinds too. Well, Evil the Knievel was monged up a bit, but nothing serious. Hired had tied a knot in the tow sack and give them all back to the feller sponsoring the event. Then Hired goes up to Evil Knievel and asks him if he minded if he took a look at his motorcycle. Well, Evil Knievel said to go for it and watched him set the motorcycle upright and cranked her up. Well, Hired did a bit of adjusting on the carburetor and got her to purring like a kitten. Well, Hired straddled that motorcycle and turned her around and took off. He hit that ramp and sailed to the other side and landed as purty as you please and rode on back to Evil Knievel and told him it was working just fine now. Well, old Evil Knievel was fit to be tied, and his jaw dropped plumb to the ground when he seen all that, I tell you. He told Hired he sure enough had a future in the daredevil business, with him a-doing tricks like that and a mechanic to boot. Well, Hired said no thanks, it worked for him, but he did ride a bit. Evil Knievel told him he could ride with him any time. If he wanted a job, there was always one waiting for him. That was a good day for Hired, and he appreciated like that. Hired's cousin was just plumb Google-eyed over it all, and when they got back to the house, he just couldn't wait to spill the beans with the story. Well, Hired's folks didn't put nothing past their boy. Hired, when it come to critters or driving or floating or flying, he was good at all of them. Yeah, the boys met up after the basketball game the next Friday night and had a laugh or two about their trips. Buster and Jesse had to stay on back to tend to chores, look after their places as their folks had to go to Mississippi. Jesse's pa had people there that was awful sick and needed help with nursing and tending to their crops for him. Buster's grandpa Gus and grandma went along too to help. Rice was Grandpa Gus's business, and he sure knowed what to do to make everything right. Buster and Jesse told Walter and Hired they sure was sorry they couldn't make it, but they would do something real soon together. The Picture show was going to be good on Saturday. Hud was playing with Paul Newman, and the Zorro serial was ending, and the boys all know they wasn't going to miss that. The cartoon was Foghorn J. Leghorn, and the boys liked him a lot. Couldn't miss that neither, you know. A hayride was planned for the evening, about sundown, out at the Sims place, and a barn dance was going to be starting about 9 o'clock at night, too. So be ready for some fun, boys, said Buster. Jesse's pheromones was a-percolating, and the gals was a-going to be around him like flies to honey. It was going to be a hot time in the old town that night, that's for sure. That's old Buster signing off to you now. Y'all have a blessed day.